Happy Holy Week, everyone, and welcome back to the Aldersgate Experience, the podcast of Aldersgate Church in York, Pennsylvania. I'm Pastor Bob Kaylor.
And I'm Pastor Jeff Markey.
We are launching into this very important week in the church year, and we just came off of Palm Sunday yesterday as we're recording this, and a very special day. Also wrapping up our series on Genesis and the story of Joseph.
Yeah, incredible. Absolutely love this last section, this last message you shared about Joseph, being able to recognize the brothers and how important it is to see God's hand at work in the midst of difficult circumstances. What you meant for evil, God meant for good.
And I always go back to what one of my seminary professors, David Siemens, talked about, which was that Genesis 50-20 vision.
Yeah.
You intended this for evil, but God intended it for good to save a people, to save a numerous people, as he has been doing. And that thread has been running all the way through. That's a reiteration of what Joseph says in chapter 45. But I think it also comes at the end of Genesis because it's an echo taking us back to Genesis 1.
Yes.
That God creates and calls things good. Genesis 3, of course, we have the fall, we have human sin, and that has seemingly derailed the project. And yet, despite all that's happened from Cain and Abel to Noah to Abraham to all the things that happened with Jacob and with Joseph's brothers, all those things, despite all of that, God is making things good.
Yes, we live in a fallen world and trying to work through what it is to live a holy life in the midst of difficult circumstances. We see Joseph do that time and time again through this whole story. And then we see his brothers still kind of clinging to some idea that Joseph's got some comeuppance for them.
Yeah, and we're going to see that throughout the rest of the Bible, really. I mean, there's this sense of the 12 tribes of Israel always going to be wrestling, always going to be struggling with identity, trying to figure out who they are. I mean, you get to the Exodus and, you know, there's a struggle there. There's a reason why they're named Israel, who strive with God, who wrestle with God. And we do the same thing. I think that's part of the value of these texts is that we're learning that we do the exact same things.
Feels like it's the whole point.
They're a representative people.
Yeah.
And God is taking them and making not so much an example out of them, but an example from them to say, here's how I'm going to reveal myself, my law, my way of being, my way of making things good. You're going to wrestle with that because you're on the other side of Genesis 3 because of human sin, because that has permeated the system. And yet God is going to continue to work through and with these people in order to bring about his ultimate good. And that takes us into the New Testament with Jesus, which is why it was interesting to me as I sat down to write this week. I just thought, how am I going to bring these threads together? The Joseph story and Palm Sunday.
Oh, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed the way you put it together.
And it starts. I think it starts with that image of the parade. You know, the funeral procession for Jacob going back to Egypt and realizing that the beginning of Holy Week is really a funeral procession as well, because it ends up on Friday with Jesus being crucified, being buried, and thinking that's the end of the story, whereas it's actually really the beginning of a new story. So we might say that Genesis 50 is kind of the end of the beginning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's the end of the beginning.
Especially, you know, in context of the book, of course.
Yeah, because that's what Genesis means. It means beginning. So here's the end of the beginning. Now we're going to live into this in a new way. And that's when we go into Exodus. But also, after the resurrection of Jesus, things are going to be done in a new way. We see the book of Acts create a whole new story because things have shifted. They've changed as a result of what took place.
Right.
And this forgiveness of Joseph, his way of looking back on things, recognizes that there's been a shift in the way things go. We've shifted from individuals to a family to now a nation.
Yeah.
We've we've shifted from a focus on human brokenness now to God's provision and moving forward.
Yeah.
All those things are taking place. And so there's two major transitions that are happening at the same time right here in the text.
How God uses those difficult circumstances is a huge, huge part in our personal growth. And that's the point of the struggle, is to grow and to learn. I think about Genesis, the last time God personally, until Christ, came, the last time he was with people in a personal way, he was walking with them in the garden and they were hiding from them. And the whole Genesis story is, there's nothing, why are you hiding? And it's like his brothers, Joseph's brothers, are afraid, they're fearful that Joseph's going to do something to them. But yet, in fact, Joseph said, who am I to judge, basically?
Yeah.
That's not my role. It's up to God to do that. And I'm just going to simply seek to be obedient.
I think that's a great observation, that thread of fear that runs through. Because when you go back to Genesis 1 and 2, particularly Genesis 2, where God is walking with Adam and Eve in the garden in the cool of the day, they're face to face.
Yeah.
Whereas when you get to Genesis, I think it's Genesis 38, and Jacob is wrestling with that God figure in the middle of the night.
Whatever that may be. Yeah.
Let me see your face. Tell me your name. All those things now are separated. There's a separation that takes place.
Yeah.
And that separation leads to fear. Human beings have separated themselves from God, from his benevolence, his grace, and now they fear. Because what's the first thing that happens with Adam and Eve? They realize they're naked, they hide, they're afraid, they're comparing themselves to one another, and now they're really comparing themselves to God, and they find their inadequacy in a powerful way, whereas that intimacy is gone. So that sense of fear does run as a thread all the way through Genesis.
Yeah.
And here at the end, Joseph is saying, no, it's not about fear, although the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, as Proverbs says.
Yeah.
But it's also about grace. It's also about that grace that says, look, whatever you have done can be redeemed. No one is too far gone to be redeemed. And that's what's happening at the end of the Joseph story. This whole family gets redeemed because Joseph chooses to forgive. And God does that for us.
Yeah.
God does that for us and enables us then to live out this way that he has created for us.
It's incredible. It's so beautiful. And obviously we see Jacob finally passes. Joseph is the one that closes his eyes. And we see the moving of his body, through this procession. And we see, and we know that Joseph, the promise of Joseph, that his bones would be taken back to Canaan as well, but that would be, quite a while. That would be through Exodus.
Yeah.
So, the comparison between Joseph's funeral procession and Jesus's triumphal entry is striking. So, what do we think we miss when we treat Palm Sunday as only a celebration and not as this start of this journey toward the cross?
I think we wind up separating things out. It's sort of like what happens if people only come to church on Christmas and Easter. You miss the hard stuff in between.
Yeah.
You're only getting the joyous parts of this. The other thing that we miss, and this is where reading the whole Bible matters, is that Jesus is acting out a parable. Everything that he's doing in Holy Week is essentially acting out a kind of script from the Old Testament. Zechariah 9 has the image of the coming king riding in on a donkey. Jesus knows that. That's why he's riding down that road on Palm Sunday on a donkey. Everyone in that crowd would know, okay, he is reflecting Zechariah 9. This is a messianic moment. But he's also weeping over the city. It's supposed to be a joyous moment, but for Jesus, he knows what's coming. And he gives this warning, particularly in Luke's gospel, about if you continue in your revolutionary ways, if you continue to want this sort of nationalistic idea and you setting up the temple as your political symbol, which is essentially what was happening.
Yeah.
And that gets to why he goes in on Monday and turns the tables over in the temple. It's not just a hissy fit over people selling stuff in church or about cheating people out of it. That's part of it. But what he's really doing is stopping the commerce in the temple, stopping the sacrificial system and saying, look, this temple's going away. And your aspirations, I mean, for Israelites in the first century, the temple, if you took the Statue of Liberty, the Washington Monument, the White House, the Capitol, you rolled all those into one symbol. That's how important that was to them.
Yeah.
Not just as a religious symbol, but also as a political symbol.
Wow.
And Jesus is saying that's all going to be torn down. And what's going to replace it? Well, he is.
Right.
He's now the center. He's now the temple. And that's where they're just blown away by that. They can't fathom any of that. And so what's happening on Palm Sunday is Jesus is coming in as the Messiah, but also what are people praying for? What are they hoping for in the midst of that? They're hoping for God to return to Zion, to kick out all these pagan Roman oppressors that are holding on to us. We want him to come back, inhabit the temple, to fill it with his Shekinah glory again, because that glory was not considered to be there, even though the temple was still the religious center. That glory of God had not rested there for a long time, ever since the Babylonians had come and taken the Ark of the Covenant away and all those kinds of things, or it was hidden, or it's in a warehouse in New Jersey. We don't know, but but all of that is bound up in this Palm Sunday symbolism.
Yeah.
And we miss that if we're not looking at the whole piece.
Yeah.
And it really is Jesus saying, this is the beginning of the week where he knows at the end there's going to be a funeral.
Yeah.
And that's why he's weeping. He says, if you're not following my way, if you're not going to abandon this nationalistic way of being, all of this is going to be torn down.
Yeah. All through his ministry, he's been talking about the kingdom of God.
Yes.
And what you're sharing, especially about the triumphal entry, when you see the temple and you see the symbolism that it's nationalistic, not necessarily thinking religiously, but thinking more nationalistically or kind of this ethnically. And Jesus is saying when he turns over those tables, this is not a clash of kingdoms. That's the kingdom of the here and now. I'm talking about the here and not yet.
Yeah.
And there's a total difference between what Jesus' ministry is all about and the temple, the way in which it was operating at the time.
Yeah. It had become like the national bank. It had become a lot of other things. And so stopping even briefly the operation of the temple was an acted parable of judgment. So Jesus acts out this return of the Messiah on Sunday. Monday, he acts this parable of judgment on the temple. He's going to go through a lot of these different symbols on the rest of the week. We read from Psalm 22 on Sunday, for example.
Yes, that was rich.
Which is a powerful thing to read alongside the crucifixion narrative. But we always skip the last part of it, which is really, in many ways, the most important part of it. There's absolutely a redemption that happens on the other side of all that suffering. Jesus is walking through all of these symbols. He's pulling them all together there.
Yeah.
So you really have to understand the Old Testament and where it's taking us in order to understand what's going on during Holy Week. And that procession of Jacob back to a funeral, that funeral and the burial in the Promised Land is almost like a down payment on a promise. Like one day this land is going to be yours.
Yeah.
And in some sense, what Jesus is doing is giving a down payment on the kingdom. This is how it's going to come. It's not going to come with power in the sense of political power. It's not going to come in the sense of armies marching through. It's not going to come in a great rebellion. It's going to come through and with those who follow in his way, which is what? It's the way of the cross.
Right.
It's the way of self-sacrifice. It's the way of giving oneself away. So you have to understand all that symbolism. Otherwise, you miss the entire point of all of it.
Yeah. When you read that Psalm 22 on Sunday, I just couldn't help but start thinking about Philippians 2.
Yeah.
Because it really reminds me of, because Christ has humbled himself by being obedient to death on a cross, God has lifted him up, given them the name above every name, that every knee shall bow in heaven and on earth. And I mean, you referenced that, I believe, later in the message. Yeah,
it's really an important symbolism. And that really struck me because as I was writing I thought, well, where's the other piece to this?
Yeah.
Where's the hopeful piece to this?
Right.
And there it is, right at the end of Psalm 22.
Yeah.
So I really encourage people, if you're looking for something to really meditate on during this Holy Week, look at Psalm 22 and read it in detail. Read it several times, maybe once a day, and see where God speaks to you in the midst of that, because it's very powerful from that standpoint. It will help to bring things into focus of what's happening during Holy Week.
Absolutely. And when you see all the things that transpire in Psalm 22, you see the passion, you see the cross right there in front of you. It's plain as day, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
Now you painted a really vivid picture of Jesus in Gethsemane. Gethsemane being pressing floor and being pressed like olives. Why do you think that's so important that Jesus experienced such intense anguish before the cross at Gethsemane?
Well, I think it reveals to us the real humanness of Jesus, as well as the divinity of Jesus. To me, it's one of the things that really brings us to the point of understanding the nature of the Trinity and what it meant for Jesus to become incarnate as the Son of God.
Wow.
If Jesus is simply someone who appears to be human, which is one of the early Christian heresies, that's a docetic heresy that says Jesus only appeared to be human. He was really just divine, just kind of took on a human shell, if you will. Then all of what happens with him is just kind of working the script. It doesn't really matter. It's not painful to him. He's just kind of acting something out for us.
You really have to remove kind of
you
Thomas.
have to step back a lot of things in order to understand that.
Yeah.
To take on that heresy. And we do it in some of our stuff. People kind of have that idea. I always like, for example, Away in a Manger, which is kind of in my mind the docetic anthem. The little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes.
It's like
what baby do you know that doesn't cry?
It's the one holdover that I'm like, I don't know about
what is
this
that?
one.
Let's skip that verse. Anyway, now I just made a lot of people angry because they love that Christmas carol, but it's a little bit docetic in that stance. Docetic. That's that early heresy.
Yeah.
But what we see with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane is a human being who's fully human, fully divine, as we say in the Creed, but at the same time has, as Paul says in Philippians 2, has humbled himself. He's taken on humanity. And in that humanity, I really believe he goes to the cross on faith.
Yeah.
That he believes God is going to do this, but he'd rather not.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
It's not like Jesus is saying, I'm going to the cross tomorrow. It's going to be a drag, but okay, we'll come through it okay. No, this is a big thing.
Yeah.
He knows what's ahead of him. And then any human being would look at that and say, man, is there another way, God, to do this?
Death is coming. Death is
I
imminent.
really don't want to do. I mean, who wouldn't?
Right.
Our humanists would say, no, don't do that. So to me, what Gethsemane reveals is here is one who is fully human and yet also fully God. Fully God knows in communion with the Father that this is the way that God is going to redeem the world by entering into human being suffering and entering into it fully. Not just dipping a toe in, not just appearing to be, but entering into human suffering fully, taking on the worst death that we can imagine in order to redeem his people. That he is going to be the sacrificial lamb. He is going to be the one who goes forward. It is not God taking out his wrath on Jesus. If we are Trinitarian, we believe that God the Father and the Spirit are also with him in that moment.
Right.
But in his humanness, he is taking on by faith, just like he's tempted in the wilderness. If that temptation doesn't have any human component of Jesus involved in it, it's just for show.
Yeah.
But does he really overcome temptation? Hebrews says he does, tempted in every way as we are, and yet without sin. So Jesus, in his full humanness, is wrestling. He's Israel's representative. He's Israel's Messiah right there in the garden. He is wrestling with this mission. And yet he says, not your will, but mine. And to me, that makes this even more important and poignant because we have a God who is not simply detached from our suffering, a God who is not who says, well, I'm not going to enter into that fully. I'm just going to appear to do so. He actually walks in the midst of it.
Yeah.
He actually takes that on himself in a very powerful way, fully representing humanity while at the same time fully representing God. All of that comes
Right.
together there in that moment. To me, that's really the power of what we celebrate on Holy Week.
Yeah, and it's such a powerful reminder that he is fully God and fully man, that he's doing this on faith. He's still, it's hard to comprehend. It's hard to wrap your mind around that, the God within him is going to submit regardless but he still had to wrestle. And it's an incredible.
Well, here again, we read, he quotes the first line of Psalm 22.
Yeah.
It was amazing how many people to me on Sunday said, I had no idea that when Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? That was the quoting of the Psalms.
Yeah.
But remember, for people in Israel, the Psalms were their prayer book. They recited them day and night. So they're steeped in them. You don't have to read them. They know them. Mm-hmm. And when Jesus quotes that, again, if you were a first century Jew, you know exactly what he's doing.
Well, he says, those who have ears, let them hear. He says that many times. And so those who have ears to know what he's saying, they understand.
Yeah, and so people will come up with all kinds of theological things like, well, at that moment, God turned his face away from Jesus. Well, that's not a very Trinitarian way of thinking. Mm-hmm. But if he's quoting Psalm 22, which he is, then he's inviting people through his own faith expressed in that moment that yes, there is intense suffering, but on the other side of it, at the end, there is redemption. This is what's necessary in order for that good news to be given to all the nations. Right. This is that moment when all of humanity's sin comes together in one place.
Yeah.
It had been taken on by Israel because God had given Israel the law to define what sin is. Now it's being taken on by Israel's representative for the whole world. And that's where on the cross, he's able to break the power of sin and death because he's entered into it fully as a human being who's also God doing it in person.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the way in which you meshed the Joseph story, the 50-20 vision, and then seeing Christ on the cross, what man meant for evil, God meant for good, it became so transparent. It's
the very fact
obvious.
that we wear a cross, we put it up everywhere. I mean, imagine if you had the electric chair, for example, as your symbol for everywhere you put it.
Yeah.
In the ancient world, that would have been the cross. Having the cross be the symbol of your faith would have been insane.
Yeah.
Because everybody, that was the servile supplicium. It was the worst death you could get. I mean, it was so bad that Roman citizens, no matter how terrible they were, they could not be crucified.
Right.
And yet we use this symbol, and we use it flippantly in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
But it really means this symbol that was meant for evil, God has taken and literally turned into the symbol for redemption, for the good that he is doing in the world. Paul says, again, the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God and the wisdom of God, all of that drawn together in that symbol.
Wow. I say that so rich so many times. Small group leaders are like, yeah, we caught you on that.
It's a good adjective.
I count it twice today.
We have to increase we'll have to have like an adjective list here for you to use.
Ping.
Yeah.
So you asked at the end of this.
Producer Randy says actually 3 times today. So
there you go.
He's actually
3.
counting. He's got a counter back there.
I counted 2. There you go. All right. I need that, Randy. Keep me honest. Now, you asked who needs to hear this story. So who in your life needs to hear the good news this week? And how can we be carriers of this 50-20 vision in the world today?
I think by walking through Holy Week and inviting others to walk with you and to really demonstrate that kind of vision in our lives, in our relationships with people. We've talked about forgiveness. We've talked about reconciliation. We've talked about all those things. When we are advocates for those things, when we're demonstrating and living them out in our own lives, that's where this 50-20 vision becomes into sharper focus, because the rest of the world is not operating this way.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity, like Joseph, to see the world in a different light through the lens of the cross, through the lens of God suffering on our behalf, and recognizing that all this evil can consume us, or we can see how God can take and use it. Not that God wills it necessarily, not that God causes it, but rather how God uses human brokenness for good.
That's redemption, that's reconciliation, that's restoration. That's all those wonderful healing opportunities within that. If we're just willing to recognize it.
Yeah.
To recognize that God wants to do this for our good.
Absolutely.
That's
well,
great.
We're hoping that you'll walk with us through Holy Week. We do have our Holy Week services here at Aldersgate. They'll be both in person and online. Monday, Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Good Friday, also 7 p.m. Eastern. And then on Easter Sunday, we've got 4 services on Sunday.
Online is 9 and 10:30 and Eastern. And then we have a 6:15 sunrise service, so you can get up early, and we're going to have some little pastries and things like that, and coffee. And then 8 a.m.
8 a.m.
8 a.m. chapel service.
And then 9 and 10:30. So we hope you'll join us for Easter celebration. All the information's on our website at aldersgateyork.com. We also hope that you'll send us your questions and comments either here on YouTube or on our email, which you can email to.
Communications@aldersgateyork.com. And
we look forward to seeing you during Holy Week. And if we don't see you, we hope you have a blessed Holy Week and a great Easter tide. We'll see you next week.
God bless.